Sup peeps! So in this video we're going to be checking out... what's it called? I can't remember. Oh shit. Oh, Amnesia! Oh, that's the one. Totally forgot. So with Halloween fast approaching and the imminent arrival of Amnesia Rebirth, we thought, hey, our knickers are a bit too clean today. How about we decorate this room 50 shades of brown, scaring ourselves silly by checking out the Amnesia collection, including both the Dark Descent and Machine for Pigs. This was our first experience entering the nerve-shredding world of Amnesia, so no nostalgia-tinted goggles here, folks. This is our honest first impressions of the franchise so far. Let's start with 2010's The Dark Descent. Developed by Frictional Games and often described as one of the most horrifying, bone-chilling games of all time, we play as protagonist Daniel, who awakens in an ominous, desolate castle in Germany with no recollection of who he is or how he got there. As the player navigates the cold, eerie castle interior, we begin to piece together Daniel's past and purpose through handwritten diary entries he had previously scattered around the place for himself to find. And the more the player descends into the narrative, the darker the tale gets. Gameplay is slow and methodical, but not in a laborious way. There's a real insidious, creeping progression throughout. There's a heavy emphasis on puzzles that get progressively mind-boggling, but once solved, it's very gratifying. Daniel navigates the creepy hallways pretty slowly, which grounds the game in an apprehensive reality. He must open each drawer and cupboard manually by pulling the right stick or dragging the mouse, which is a feature I really enjoyed, feeling more in control and affecting the world that I'm exploring. Not only that, Daniel can pick up almost anything that's within a normal human's capability and hurl them across the room. This is always fun, but there's also a use for this mechanic, such as frantically removing obstacles that block a doorway while the enemy full-on sprints at you from behind, or using hunks of meat or smashing bottles as a decoy or distraction. There are items of importance that Daniel must pick up, such as tinder boxes which light the torches that litter the corridors. These obviously light Daniel's way, but you need to be careful not to get too giddy with these, because when you're being hunted, you must seek out the insanity-inducing darkness to hide in, and you could massively regret lighting up the corridors like the f***ing Christmas tree in Times Square. Daniel must balance these torchlights with the lantern that he carries. Dotted around the castle are bottles of oil to keep this lantern fueled, but they're not as common as tinderboxes, so walking around with your lantern on full blast or lighting every torch you see is not advisable. This, amongst other things, forces the player to face their fears by embracing the darkness. Also, there are plenty of gratifying puzzles for you to solve. Some that will have you pulling your hair out and left me nearly as confused as Guybrush Threepwood in LucasArts' Escape from Monkey Island, trying to figure out what I'm supposed to do with a crank, a moist hat, 3 plums, a jet engine and 3 hairs plucked from a 5-legged goat. They aren't quite that complicated in Amnesia: The Dark Descent, but one example at first glance, you've got a leg of meat, a glass jar and a piece of string. It's not until you thoroughly explore the environment that you uncover their uses in an extremely enjoyable puzzle that had me looking under every nook and cranny. I would say, for a horror game, they may have gone a little too heavy on the puzzle side of things, and even though this was the best aspect of the game, no puzzle was actually scary. The scares were in between the puzzles. There were a few moments where I'd have to solve a puzzle whilst evading an enemy, but this wasn't very common, which leads me onto the enemies of the game themselves. There's only a small handful of enemy types, the most common being the lumbering, swinging-jawed gatherers, who are former soldiers who were lost in the woods that now serve the castle's owner, Alexander, after drinking his poisoned wine, and look like disfigured humanoid slugs that have been mummified in a condom. Truly horrifying. They were easy to avoid and their field of vision is pretty awful. Once they spot you, however, 9 times out of 10, it's game over. There's no luxury of combat here, so evasion and hiding like a little sissy gimp is your only option. You do come across another invisible enemy type, known as the Karen... screw it, let's just call it Karen, that scours the waters beneath the castle, and all Daniel can see is the ripples and splashes that this aquatic bastard fish thing makes. You have to hop from box to box like playing Floor is dog shit. Floor is lava is so 2019, because one step in that water and the invisible beast will mow you down. By far the most terrifying moment in the game, because for me, not being able to see what can hurt you is way more unsettling than seeing what you are running from. Not least when you have to utilise rigid, clunky controls like a retro platformer in order to stay alive. This is definitely not a criticism though. The severe lack of empowerment, both in terms of movement and the absence of combat, makes the player feel completely vulnerable and defenceless, which only heightens the tension tenfold. There were unfortunately far too many buggy moments in the game, where I was stuck behind a box for example, being pummeled with a flurry of hits to the dick by an enemy, but for some reason never actually killed me, but gave me the chance to have a good close look at them and throw up into my mouth due to their abject grotesqueness. Other bugs where I just fell through the level and continued to fall for over a minute before eventually dying and reloading, and other moments where enemy AI just lost the plot and went totally insane. Speaking of insane, straight away you're introduced to the insanity mechanic. This is where if Daniel spends too long in the dark he sees disturbing visions or an apparition like a door swinging open, or spends too long looking at an enemy he starts to spaz out. This fisheye effect is noteworthy but can be toggled on and off in the settings. The devs recommended playing with headphones in a darkened room just for this fisheye effect alone, and it's definitely worth it. And not just from a fear factor point of view, because any glare on your screen or setting the gamma too low makes it borderline unplayable. This insanity effect is an interesting idea but really felt a little pointless towards the latter stages of the game and needed to have more of an impact on how the game is played other than simply blurring my vision and eventually making Daniel drag his face along the floor for 30 seconds before going, oh, that's better, then carrying on. As for the general graphics of the game, it is from 2010 and it does show. Pretty rough around the edges, but some fairly decent lighting effects from natural light sources, but there's enough quality and horror to immerse yourself and see past these little limitations. The fear in this game feeds your paranoia. Having played the game as advised in the dark with headphones on, I felt the moments of uncertainty and this insidious build of apprehension had me quaking in my wellies at times, rather than the more overt stealth and evasive moments of the game. The subtle noises of faint screams way off in the distance, the sudden door slam followed by floorboards above your head creaking with unknown footsteps, created a foreboding atmosphere that very few games can match even today. That's what scared me. The Dark Descent is an appropriate title, both literally and metaphorically, because the devs have made a great attempt to highlight the protagonist's degrading mental well-being as Daniel's mind descends into darkness. Although this attempt was interesting and fairly unique for a game in 2010, it could have been made more relevant to the actual gameplay experience and manifested itself in more creative ways than simply blurring the player's vision. Ultimately though, the game as a whole is up there with one of the great horror experiences of the previous generation, and ironically for a game called Amnesia, it is far from forgettable. So moving on to the second game in the series, Amnesia, a machine for pigs. Oh, old MacDonald had a farm, E-I-E-I. In this direct sequel to The Dark Descent, Frictional Games took more of a backseat publishing role on this one and handed the reins over to the Chinese Room, who had previously created the haunting and poignant exploration game Dear Esther. We play as protagonist Oswald Mandus, thought to be the great-grandnephew of The Dark Descent's Daniel. Like the first game, you awaken with a loss of memory, in this case after suffering from a fever he contracted after an epically failed expedition to a mysterious Aztec ruin in Mexico. As the story unfolds, Oswald must rescue his two sons who have been trapped within the mysterious and stinking swine-infested machine. 4 pigs. There are some glaringly obvious differences between The Dark Descent and A Machine for Pigs. Straight off the bat is the setting. A setting I found really intriguing thanks to a little more vibrancy in the colour palette choices compared to the bleak austerity of the first game. Machine for Pigs envelops the player in 19th century British domestic architecture, combined with the cold, bleak setting of churning pistons emphasising the growing industrialism sweeping the country at the time. There's a lot more variation for the player to see compared to The Dark Descent. Oswald ventures inside and outside a lot more, showcasing the cobbled streets of England with huge looming factories puffing out smoke and eerie graveyards surrounding a haunted church. Inside the house at the beginning of the game, I found a little too comforting to be honest. This area was designed to build suspense and induce paranoia for the player, but the well-lit, brightly coloured hallways of the house didn't really evoke this feeling. The Chinese Room removed huge gameplay elements that were really enjoyable in The Dark Descent. Most notably, the inventory is now gone, which straight away made it feel like much more of a reduced version of The Dark Descent and way too close to a walking simulator, like Dear Esther. The puzzles were never going to reach the complexities of The Dark Descent because any item of interest that Oswald needs to pick up can be manually held in front of him and physically carried to the area where it needs to be solved that particular puzzle. It was laid out in front of me, clear as day what I was supposed to do. There were times where doors would slam shut, leaving another one open, leaving me thinking, well, I guess I'm going to have to go that way then. Where's the challenge in that? It's like hiring someone to hold your knob for you when you go for a piss. I enjoyed the gathering of multiple ingredients in the first game, having to search every corner of every room thoroughly, and having this removed in Machine for Pigs ultimately worsened the game. Another obvious realisation to having no inventory means no resource gathering, such as tinder boxes to light up certain areas or fuel for your oil lamp. Oswald is instead given an electric lamp, which never runs out, negating the whole balancing act of light versus darkness that was a fun survival element in the Dark Descent. The insanity mechanic from the Dark Descent has also been removed, and although I didn't love it to begin with, removing it and replacing it with absolutely nothing seems lazy and left me feeling even more distance from the survival horror experience that I was craving. An underlying narrative theme between both games is despicable experimentation, human eugenics at its worst, and these experiments have extended onto animals this time round. And although in theory that shouldn't be a bad choice for a horror game, in practice it kind of is. Especially when you're left with pig men. No, I'm not talking about the police, naughty naughty. This is maybe just a personal preference, but this game has taught me that pigmen do not scare me. It felt less like Pigsy from Manhunt and more like Babe from, well, Babe.
That'll do, pig. That'll do.
Sure, they present the same danger as the enemies in the Dark Descent, in that once they spot you, you better run, because a couple of grunting swipes to the back whilst trying to escape will very quickly turn you into a pack of pork scratchings. There's still no way to fight the enemies, and that's a good thing because the arse-clenching fear factor of the chase is retained. The Chinese room resorted to a few more jump scares than its predecessor, which did send me upstairs for a few new pairs of gruds a couple of times, but again, it seems like a regressive, less refined scare tactic to the ones employed in the Dark Descent. There was still an incredibly disturbing story that kept us gripped, and for me, that alone saves this game. Barely, by the skin of its snout. The story is told in short revealing bursts of disturbing information, this time via phone calls from a mysterious character outlining your next objective, a few audio recordings heard through small gramophones, and plenty of torn notes dotted around the place. Overall, Machine for Pigs really lets down its predecessor, and although the game is drastically shorter than the Dark Descent, completing it took me around 5 hours, I'd still say it's worth playing just for the disturbing lore alone. The main thing that springs to mind is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. As this is a review for the collection looking at both games as a whole, it's easy to state that so far the Dark Descent is really still flying the flag and propping up the franchise for horror gaming fans. Considering at the time of this recording, this video, the collection can be bought for less than £5 or $5, it's totally worth it, an absolute steal. So, our overall score for Amnesia, the collection, is... With Amnesia Rebirth releasing on the 20th of October, which we are pretty hyped for and will be playing on the channel, you can see where the game is likely to be heading. From the trailers and other leaks, the game will be set in Algeria, and with the backstory behind both the Dark Descent and A Machine for Pigs stemming from Algeria, it's likely to delve deeper into the origins of the mysterious orbs at the core of the franchise. I've been Les. If you've enjoyed this review, please like and subscribe, and maybe hit that bell and icon too to be informed of all our future uploads. If there's anything you want to see us review next, drop us a comment below and we will see you in the next one. In a bit, peeps!